So Yaramalumang Nindugi, Nathan Sensu Nari, Waraji Gibi Balado, Yindimalija, Garago Mujigango, Yindimalija, Nari Mujigango, Gargola, Nurumbanga, Naru Warana. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge that we are currently on the unceded land of the Gadigal people. I want to pay my respects to their elders past and present and recognise that no matter what is built on this land, no matter what happens on this land, that it always was and always will be Gadigal land, Aboriginal land. I would also like to acknowledge that I do not believe I am the only voice to express these views in my talk tonight, or the most sophisticated, or the first. But I'm the voice that's here today, and my ability to express my voice about the GLAM sector and my work has been made possible by the many First Nations uncles and aunties in the sector before me, and my many brothers and sisters working hard in the sector today. I recognise that I'm standing on the shoulders of giants, and my voice is part of a continuum of Indigenous voices. Hello, my name is Nathan Mudgee Sentance. I'm a Wiradjuri man from the Mowgee clan, originally from Mudyi, but I grew up on Darkinjung Country on the New South Wales Central Coast, about an hour and a half north from here, where my dad helped with the establishment of the Eleanor Duncan Aboriginal Medical Service. I often call myself Nathan Mudgee Sentance because my great-grandmother, when she lost her family, my ancestors in a massacre, when she was 7, she was sent to work as a domestic servant. And she was forbidden to use her real name, so they gave her a name, Diana Mudgee. Diana because it's a good Christian name, and Mudgee because that's where she's from. So her name was Diana Mudgee. Mudgee, I hypothesize, comes from the Wiradjuri word Mudyi, which means friend or mate. So I often call myself Nathan Mudgee Sentence to reclaim and repurpose a name imposed on my great-grandmother. Also, Mudyi means friend or mate, and I'm a friendly guy, so I think it fits. And I also think it's important for me to introduce myself so you know who I am and where I'm coming from. I've been in the GLAM sector, galleries, libraries, archives and museums for close to 10 years. I started at the State Library of New South Wales in the Indigenous Engagement branch, mostly working in how archives and libraries can assist with First Nations language revitalisation. I now work at the Australian Museum here on Darkinjung Country as a First Nations programming officer and mostly facilitating First Nations events and workshops. For example, we hosted Nyalu Warui Maori earlier this year, which means we stand strong in the Sydney language. And it was a night event in response to Jan 26. Many First Nations people I know that work in museums get told not to rock the boat in subtle or not so subtle ways. But the ships that we work in, museums, libraries and archives, were founded in whiteness, colonialism, the patriarchy and heteronormativity. They are boats that come from colonial violence, and that's the way they'll keep going if they're not rocked. That's why we need to rock them, and that's why we need to disrupt the status quo. So I love tonight's theme. And for this talk tonight, I'm not going to really focus on projects that I'm working on. What I really want to do is sort of start a conversation about how we, us in museums, libraries and archives, can use the anniversaries of events, dates and people in ways to get the public to critically reflect, to use dates to create action, to use anniversaries to disrupt the status quo internally and in society more broadly. I'm going to be talking mostly about the why of this. Hopefully we can discuss the how outside this talk. My email and Twitter will be on the last slide, so we can talk about it. Across Australia, government organisations such as schools, museums, councils often commemorate anniversaries of events such as Jan 26, or people like Macquarie through the public celebrations or the building of statues. If you ask why we have these celebrations, most people will say it's to remember our history and to reflect upon it. But I actually believe that's rarely the case. These celebrations, these statues, often have very little to do with history, and at best they're sometimes shallow, at worst they are propaganda for colonisation. And this, of course, is a problem for many reasons. Besides the fact that it's disgusting to celebrate colonisation, audiences do not take anything away from these commemorations, because without critique, without the truth about the physical, legal, and material repercussions of colonisations, these anniversaries lack social relevance. They do not assist in creating contemporary social change, which should be the goal for all our output in our organisations. What's the point of talking about the past to our audiences if it doesn't connect to their present? And this doesn't happen often because anniversaries and similarly colonial statues were not created to be conversation starters or to be cautionary tales of white supremacy. Many anniversaries, particularly nationalistic ones, were created and exist to maintain Australia's self-image of innocence by celebrating colonisation and colonisers despite the suffering we First Nations people have experienced and continue to experience. People often say any revisionism or any critique of these celebrations is rewriting history. when these statues and celebrations themselves are rewriting history. And this can explain why when National's Deputy Leader, Bridget Mackenzie, in attempting to explain why the country celebrates Australia Day on Jan 26, said it was because Jan 26 was the day James Cook stepped ashore these lands, when the actual date he stepped ashore was April 29. But this did not matter to her because she was not defending facts, she was defending an ideology. Jan 26 was not about history to her. This is also why James Cook is celebrated as a symbol of Australia and Australianism, even though Australia means very little to him, as he died 9 years before the first fleet came to these lands. He died 122 years before the inauguration of the Commonwealth of Australia in 1901. But people will tell you that James Cook is important, but they would struggle to tell you where in England he was from or how old he was when he came to Australia. Yet these symbols and anniversaries could be tools to get people to understand that something that many First Nations people know well, and which is that we are living in the product of history. The events of the past are connected to our actions and experiences of today. Thus, anniversaries could be a catalyst to help us understand how did we get here, and how things like unjust Australian colonial oppressive structures were formed, so we know how they currently operate and then how to abolish them. For this to happen, challenging history needs to be told. First Nations history needs to be told. And there needs to be more space for the mainstream historical narrative to be challenged. There also needs to be more space for potential discomfort for white settler audiences. If this is not done, anniversaries may remain as propaganda tools which will only glorify and proliferate a misrepresentation of the founding and building of Australia. As a result, they will remain tools of oppression and celebrations of ongoing invasion and genocide for First Nations people, and won't help audiences better understand the current world we live in. And this is important because next year is 2020, which is the 250th anniversary of James Cook coming to the east coast of these lands and claiming them on behalf of the British Crown. It's only a minuscule part of 100,000+ year history of these lands. However, as a colonial cultural marker, it will be highly commemorated and celebrated throughout the year. Many of the organisations we work in will be tasked with coming up with programs, social media content to commemorate this. How do we incorporate critique with this content, which is more than just a footnote or a small addition? And just a reminder too, 2020 could be a very intense year for First Nations people. Of these lands, as the injustice we face and are facing are ignored, while the 100,000 year plus history is barely acknowledged, and the lie of European discovery is continuously repeated. So you just got to be wary that any commemoration, celebratory or critical, may re-traumatize people that live with trauma from this experience. That being said, I do believe that 2020 could be an opportunity to get mainstream Australia to question what they're actually celebrating and why, through the exposure to different narratives, especially First Nations narratives. This might get people to be more critical of the history they've been taught when they're growing up, and maybe get people to empower more people to be critical of current misrepresentations of First Nations people by the media, by government organisations, and by us in GLAM. Could 2020 inspire others to be critical of things like the NT intervention? Could it inspire action against Aboriginal over-incarceration? And this kind of leads into a project that I'm currently working on, which inspired this train of thought, which is the 2020 project, which will definitely have its name changed. It's the Australian Museum's response to Cook in 1770. It's a completely First Nations right of reply to 250 years of predominantly white settler history. The exhibition will be curated by Wawa and Kumar woman Laura McBride, and assistant curator Yuan woman Mariko Smith. This exhibition and preceding programs won't be about adding First Nations perspectives. It will be about privileging First Nations perspectives that are often ignored or suppressed. One thing we have done differently with this exhibition that the Australian Museum hasn't done before is we've actually tried to democratise voice. We did an open survey, which was open to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders, asking them what they wanted to see in the exhibition and what they didn't want to see. And out of the 805 responses we got from First Nations people, will completely dictate our curatorial and programming decisions for the project. And you can read the data if you go onto the Australian Museum website, look up the 2020 report. Like all history, I believe that we should utilise anniversaries to better understand the present and to better understand the historical context in which we live, especially in terms of oppressive structures. This understanding could be a call of action to make the present better. Commemorations, like all things museums do, should have a purpose. So if your museum is working on anniversaries, or you know good examples of this, or just have ideas floating around your head, please hit me up. I'd love to hear your ideas. I'd love to collaborate, love to talk. So that's my email, that's my Twitter. Mandenguru, thank you.